This is my 84th video on my work with OO gauge. See part 1 of this series for my reasons for getting into OO gauge when I already had a lot invested in working in N gauge and I didn't really have space available for a large, fully operational OO gauge layout. Also see my lengthy series on my N gauge railway modelling for smaller and more complex scenery and smaller scale trains running. This part is really just a continuation of the previous part, part 83, dealing with 3 very old Hornby Dublo, Triang and Wrenn Locos that I picked up recently. That previous part was starting to run rather long, so I deferred further attempts to shoot running video with the Locos to another part, this part. I'm not going to go over all the details of what the models are here, see the previous video for that. Suffice to say that they're all old Locos dating back to the 1960s, possibly even the 1950s. And they're all fitted with simplex couplings, which were the standard for all later Hornby Dublo and for some time afterwards, rather than with the tension lock couplings that are used for OO gauge in Britain today. After I'd shot video of the Locos being test-run light engine on the layout and then being run with trains using my handheld camcorder, I wanted to go on to try to shoot something more in the nature of track-level passing video, something a bit closer to how you might see real trains. For this I tried a number of different cameras. I also tried to use the Android sound app that I demoed in part 82. I know it can't produce results anything like what can be done with DCC sound, but I wanted to see if I could use it to enhance video clips. I think it sometimes succeeded and sometimes didn't. There are things it can do not too badly and things it really can't do. You be the judge and let me know. Before we get to any running, digression number 1. In my previous video, part 83, when I was running the goods train with the Hornby Dublo tank wagons, it kept derailing when it got to this place in the tracks. Specifically, the leading tank wagon kept hitting the post of that signal, although the post appears to be well clear of the tracks, and nowhere near any part of the wagon if the wagon is just stood on the track next to it. After this happened several times, I realised that what was happening was that as the wheels of the wagon went through that groove in the frog of the point, the right-hand wheels of the wagon were getting kicked up as the groove was too shallow for their flanges. This resulted in the wagon tipping to its left and hitting the signal post. I had actually changed the wheels on the wagons, as they were originally Hornby Dublo 3-rail wagons, and so their wheels weren't insulated at all and simply short-circuited the power when it was applied to the track. I replaced the original axles and wheels with Hornby Dublo 2-rail axles with wheels, which I was able to get from British model trains. But those are still very old wheels, and they have very large flanges. Between the shooting of the previous part and the shooting of this part, I took a needle nose file to that point and filed out the groove in the frog to make it a bit deeper. That does seem to have stopped the Dublo wagons from derailing when they go over this point. Now on to some running video. The first camera I tried was the Mobius C2 wide angle seen in the middle here, largely because it was already charged up and ready to go. This is the camera I've been using when I need wide shots showing the whole of my Hornby layout, for example when I was demoing the Duet controller. It's probably a bit too wide angle for train passing shots, inevitably showing a bunch of stuff that would be better not shown, such as the walls of the room. Anyway, here's a little passing video shot with that. The next camera I tried was the Mobius Mini, seen at right here. Considerably less wide angle and maybe a bit better quality than the original Mobius. Next, I tried what has become pretty much my #1 go-to camera for everything except handheld video, the Sony HX60V. The Mobius cameras I had just balanced on the tracks right on the layout. This Sony I mounted on a tripod just off the side of the layout. It has an excellent 30x optical zoom, so it's pretty easy to zoom in with it when it's on a tripod. Here are a few clips shot with that. this point I digressed again, as it was rather frustrating that I really couldn't get the Wrenn tank engine to pull a passenger train, as I had no coaches with simplex couplings, and trying to hook up the tension lock coupling of a coach to the simplex coupling of the Loco was an iffy business that didn't really tend to work for long. This was one possible solution. I had this Triang converter horse box. It's called a converter because it has a simplex coupling on one end and a tension lock coupling on the other end, and so can be used to combine stock with the two different types of couplings in the same train, hopefully without risk of accidental uncoupling. Here's the simplex coupling on one end of the converter box coupled to the Wrenn Loco. And here's the tension lock coupling on the other end of the box coupled to the lead coach. Here's a view of the bottom of the converter wagon, clearly showing the two types of coupling. That worked, but having to run a horse box at the front of every passenger train this Loco pulled was hardly an ideal solution. I didn't have on hand any loose simplex couplings, but I did have, in addition to the converter horse box, a couple of converter open wagons like this. Now the simplex coupling on this is screwed on. So could I unscrew it and screw it onto a coach? Well, to do so I first had to find a coach to which a coupling could be readily screwed. A lot of my coaches had couplings that were formed as part of the bogies themselves. Many of the older coaches had couplings riveted in place which could have been drilled off, but I didn't really want to do that. I finally managed to find a coach that had its couplings screwed on. This was actually a coach that I'd acquired but never yet run, so it was still in its box. The box was from Replica Railways, but the coach says Bachmann on the bottom. In any case, it had screwed-on Bachmann couplings that could easily be removed and replaced. I unscrewed the coupling from one end of the coach and unscrewed the simplex coupling from the converter wagon. It was clear that the hole for the screw in the simplex coupling was much larger than the hole in the Bachmann coupling. In fact, it was so large that the small Bachmann screw went right through it. Nevertheless, I managed to attach the simplex coupling to the bogie of the Bachmann coach using a washer. The next problem I ran into was that the downward protruding peg of the simplex coupling was so long that it hit the sleepers when the coupling was mounted on the Bachmann coach. Realistically, I don't actually use those downward pegs on the simplex couplings. I assume they're there to support uncoupling, since they seem to play no part in coupling. Since I don't actually use these pegs, I wasn't too upset about just snipping off the bottom of this peg, which was easy enough as this simplex coupling is made of plastic. With that done, it was finally possible to hook up the Bachmann coach between the Wrenn Loco and another coach with tension lock couplings. To get a nice firm coupling, I needed to adjust the height of the coupling on the Loco a bit, but that was actually easily enough done, as that coupling was sheet metal and easily bent down a bit with pliers. This version of the train ran fine, but it was an odd mixture, as the two coaches I'd been originally using were non-corridor suburban coaches with grey roofs, whereas the Bachmann coach that I'd made into a converter was a corridor composite with a silver roof. So I put the two suburban coaches into a siding and dug out two corridor coaches with silver roofs to make up a more sensible train. The coaches still don't match perfectly, but this seems fairly plausible. Here's that train going round the curve. Of course, passenger trains always look a bit silly on model railways, as the curves are always too tight of necessity. But this train went round the curves without any problems and stayed coupled. Here's a close-up of my converter coach in place. So now let's just see a bit more running video including that train. For these final clips I went with this little action camera just stood on the layout like this.